Why don't we talk about where people can constitutional carry?
Yeah, this is a big one. There's really a list of 14 places under state law, and then federal law, obviously, federal property, federal buildings off limits. We'll take that. But when it comes to our Texas places, this is a question we got about a lot last time. And so, in order to find, and this is a list that constitutional carriers, I mean, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And so, whereas license holders, you go take your training class, you sign, they force feed it to you. You got to know these places. Texas constitutional carriers need to check out Texas Penal Code 4603 for our list of prohibited places. Now, a lot of these places are common sense. And so we got our 14 places. We'll start off with schools. Okay. And when Texas uses the word, a premises, what we mean is a building or a portion of a building. So what we're talking about is typically the interior of a building. But when it comes to schools, we have the federal gun-free school zones law. So if you're only carrying under the authority of Texas constitutional carry, you got to stay away from schools. And absolutely, you cannot carry inside the buildings or in a location where school sponsored activity is taking place.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in before
Yeah.
we get to more places, because this is something we touched on it last time, but it is confusing and it's complicated for people. You've got the interaction here between federal law and state law.
Mm-hmm.
State law saying anyone, constitutional carrier or LTC holder, could carry right up into the threshold of that school building. You can't carry inside, but you could carry right up to the front doors, kiss your baby on the forehead, send them in, and that would be fine. But it's the federal law that's really hurting constitutional carriers. The federal law saying if you're within 1,000 feet of a school, you cannot carry unless you fall into an exception. And that really common exception that people rely upon is having a license or permit to carry in the state in which the school sits. And so it's the federal law that's saying constitutional carriers cannot get within 1,000 feet of the school with that handgun, whereas LTC holders can. And it's an interaction again that's worth noting, even though we talked about it last time, because it's anytime federal law and state law sort of conflict, it gets a little complex.
Yeah, and important to note, I'm going to go ahead and go to a quick live question because it's worth noting now before we go any further. Ruben asks, what does this mean for LTC holders? Just a quick note. I mean, this program really is targeted for constitutional carriers, but as an LTC holder, if you carry the same way today and going forward as you did yesterday prior to September 1st, you're going to be just fine. Okay. The places that you had under 46035, under 4603 still exist. Your rights have just expanded as a license holder. So I just want to put that note out for license holders. Your rights have expanded. If you carry the same way, you're going to be just fine. But for the most part, when we're talking about these topics, we're really going to focus on constitutional carries. Great question, Ruben. And going back to schools, it comes up college campuses. That federal gun-free school zone law, like Emily was talking about, that doesn't apply to college campuses. And so a question we got last time is, how does this law interact with Texas constitutional carry? And the rule is that you are just now talking about the premises. So constitutional carriers, you're not carrying into the premises of a college building. So license holders, you might be able to carry in there so long as they haven't provided effective notice. But constitutional carriers, you cannot carry into the college campus buildings. That's a good point.
Mhm.
Another prohibited place people need to know about: polling places on early voting or during an election. Courts, offices used by courts. We're going to go over the most common ones. 51% establishments. This is our bars. These are places that derive 51% or more of their income. It's derived from the consumption of alcohol on the premises. So you want to talk a little bit about that, Em?
Yeah, so this is one of these sort of interesting changes in the law that frankly may or may not have been intentional in the drafting of HB 1927, but we have 51% warnings, and you generally see these red 51% signs, and that's your notice that it is a felony to carry that handgun inside the bar. For LTC holders, and this is the way it has been and the way it will be going forward, when you see that sign, you're on notice. So let's imagine that an LTC holder goes into a place, they think it's a restaurant, they serve food, they don't realize it's actually 51% until they walk to the bathroom, and then that's the first place a 51% sign is posted. Well, now they're on notice. It's a felony to have that handgun. They've got to book it out to the car as fast as possible and disarm themselves. Constitutional carriers do not get that notice. And
No.
so it's really sort of a scary thing for constitutional carriers. You don't have to see a sign to be committing a felony as a constitutional carrier. So license holders actually get the benefit here of being warned that you're in a bar, whereas constitutional carriers, I mean, you better have a crystal ball for some places
Yeah,
because you're committing a felony the second you walk in the door, even if there's no sign posted.
right. And so going back to kind of our big long list, and we're not going to hit them all, so you need to go to this description of this video. The U.S. Law Shield Constitutional Carry Guide has a chart that breaks it all down. But just want to go over some more common places: hospitals, nursing facilities. We're going to talk about open government meetings of open governmental meetings. So these are in places, a lot of times those are held in schools or courts, which are already prohibited. But let's say it's at a city hall where it would otherwise be okay. Open meetings, that was a big debate this go around. So open meetings off limits, places of execution, that probably doesn't come up too much. Racetracks where pari-mutuel wagering is taking place, sporting events. So it's not a common sense list. License holders have had to commit these to memory for, decades now. It's something that constitutional carriers need to be aware of. Like I said, ignorance of the law, not an excuse. Go to Texas Penal Code 4603, check out the Constitutional Carry Guide.